There are inquiries that we get for the Royal Observatory where I genuinely think, where else could this event happen except at the Royal Observatory? The addition of Gen Z is going to be a really exciting one to the industry. Social media is so much more important now. The trend is bespoke. It is individual. And then I think in terms of recruitment, the main issue is...
Welcome to One Amazing Experience, where we speak to events and hospitality leaders about the work that goes on behind the scenes to create incredible experiences for our guests. I'm joined today by Sophie Linin, Deputy Head of Events at Royal Museums Greenwich. Sophie's worked at venues including the London Eye, Madame Tussauds, and the Honourable Society of the Middle Temple, to name a few. Joining the Royal Museums Greenwich team in 2019 as a Business Development Manager, she's then risen up through the ranks to become Deputy Head of Events, overseeing a team of 7 event professionals who cover commercial hire across the 5 museums in the collection. She's also a board member at Unique Venues of London, working to ensure quality, diversity and inclusion at venues across the portfolio. Sophie, welcome to One Amazing Experience. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I mentioned some of your experience in the intro, but I think I'm interested to start out by talking about how you first got into events. Was there a moment where you thought, yeah, this career is the one I'm interested in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, like a lot of people, I absolutely just fell into it. I had a very misspent youth as an actor and worked in a number of different hospitality roles, pub, waitress, all of the above, and was working at the London Eye as a 0-hour host, going on to the capsules and pouring champagne. And I was going up and down the river on a boat, doing on the left-hand side you have this, and on the right-hand side you have this. And I realised I'd just done an awful acting job, and I realised I didn't really want to do it anymore. And I was just really, really lucky that the manager that I had at the time sort of encouraged me to apply for a job as an event coordinator. It's a 3-month position working on the events boat that the London Eye had, called the Silver Barracuda, which still exists, but is operated by Wood Silver Fleet. And I applied and I got it and I started doing it. And I just went, oh my God, I love this. This is it's just the best thing ever. I really enjoyed talking to people in the hospitality element, but I also found the process, the logistics, the having to manage multiple different things all at the same time, really, really enjoyable. And the 3-month position was over the Christmas period, so really, really super busy. And then it was kind of coming to an end in January. And I sort of said to the manager at the time, I don't really know what else to do. So he said, why don't you apply for a job at the wider Merlin events team, which I did. So I started working operationally there and really sort of honed my skills, and then just want to keep doing it. I went after that over to the Honourable Society of the Middle Temple, where I again was kind of purely operational, but that was my first foray into weddings. I started being sort of the wedding person there, if you like. So I did it from sales all the way through to running it on the day, and I found that full 360 degree way of running events far more enjoyable, far more freeing. Really loved getting to have relationships with the clients. Some of them I still sort of am friends with on Facebook and, speak to and go out for dinner with and those sorts of things. And I realised then that I quite like the sales side. I also wanted to stop doing long hours. I was working about 80 hours a week then, and I was doing a degree part-time at the time as well. So I wanted to move to more of a 9 to 5. I wanted to get a dog. So I decided to specialise in the sales, moved over to BAFTA as sales manager at BAFTA 195, and then moved over to Royal Museums Greenwich as business development manager, and then just sort of rose up through the ranks at Royal Museums Greenwich, where I've now been for 6 years.
Amazing. It's a great breadth of venues, different types of clients, different types of events. Would you say that there is one key thing, not guarantees, but that helps create a truly memorable event? Does it really depend on the variables of the type of event, the client, the requirements, the venue?
It does absolutely depend on the variables. You could have all of the best people in the world, but if one supplier is going to let down the team, then the event isn't going to be a success. I think the key thing that I find to be the most valuable for a successful event is having a very clear vision about what you want the event to be and what the purpose of the event is. So really understanding as a client what the reason for hosting an event is, why you're going to spend all of this money, what you want the guests to feel when they wander into the event for the first time, or what you want them to talk about when they're on the tube going home, and what you want them to remember 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years from now about that event. And if you have that vision really early on, and then you let that vision define all of the other elements. So by starting at that central point, then you get the venue and the suppliers on board with that vision. You pick the right ones to help you fulfill that ultimate vision. That will stand the whole event in so much better stead than if you are sort of just thinking, oh, we'll just have a party and we'll see what somebody can come up with. You know, there are inquiries that we get for the Royal Observatory, for example, where I genuinely think, where else could this event happen except at the Royal Observatory? It is so niche, so specific, so absolutely suited to that specific venue. We try at Royal Museums Greenwich to match suppliers to the client rather than just saying, well, these are the cheap ones, these are the more expensive ones. We want to really understand what cuisine they want, how they want the food to be served, what price point they're working on. Do they want it to say something with the food, or are they just wanting there to be food there that people can eat? You know, what are they looking at? Likewise with production, you know, do they want lots of branding? Do they want the lighting to be key? And then kind of say, you need to meet this supplier and connect and share that vision so that everyone's on board with the same thing. I think that's ultimately what any event professional wants, is to have a successful event at the end of the day. And to do that, they need to know what the client is wanting to get out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you find that sometimes there's a range of clients that come in that are really honed in on that sort of core experience that they want to deliver, and then there's some that you sort of have to help them get a bit more specific about that? Is that a part of the process?
Absolutely, it is. I think people know, if you go to certain venues and if you go to certain suppliers, that their creativity is what you're buying into. And, you know, sometimes people do need a little bit of help. We talk about getting sort of two types of inquiries. We get the inquiries where people just think, oh, you've got some really nice buildings and I want to throw a 40th birthday party, or, you know, a client networking event, or whatever it might be. Can you tell me how I can do that at your lovely venues? And then we get the people who say, we have a very specific theme or link which your venue X works really, really well for. What can we do? You know, what capacity is it? What works well at your venues? How can we really tie this theme into that? And then we'll sort of work with them on what the options are at those specific venues. And I think that tends to be the case with most unique venues, that people are either just going, oh, isn't it pretty? Let's have a lovely party. Or they're really connecting to what the actual venue is. And I always find the latter is far more fun, far more creative, far more sort of room to stretch your wings, if you like. But both are equally valid. And we're always happy to help almost give words to people. They sort of know what they want, but they can't describe it. So it's about giving them the language, and specifically the event language, to be able to achieve something. You may say, I want it to, you know, feel like an English garden. Okay, this is how we're going to do that. Do you want it to feel like an English garden in this sense with the food and what you're tasting, or do you want it to visibly be an English garden with the florals and the lighting, or do you want it to smell a certain way, or is it to do with the venue? You know, what is it? And being able to sort of translate that vision for them, I think is probably the best way to describe it.
Yeah, absolutely. But I'm definitely guilty from a marketing point of view of coming in with a brief with its very top level. And then I need people to help me get specific. Yeah. Right, you want to order this type of thing, but this adds this logistical complexity which you need to think about. So yeah, it's a process, I guess. I mentioned in the intro that you're in a leadership position now. You're managing and overseeing a team. What's been your biggest learning from moving from a more operational role into a role where you are still very involved operationally, but also having to manage a team and the performance of the team?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've discussed previously that actually I don't tend to do that much actual eventing anymore. My day-to-day role is mainly managing the team and strategy. When I was operational, you are almost 9 to 5 frustrated. as an operational staff member, you're just angry and frustrated and volatile and tired for the vast majority of the time, and it's very difficult to sort of understand why you're being asked to do X, or why, when you're a manager, you understand exactly why those things are. So a lot of it is being able to explain why you're doing certain things to your staff. I think that's been the big shift, kind of going from the person moaning, oh, why have I been asked to do X, Y, and Z, to being the person asking them to do X, Y, and Z. I like to think that because I've been there on the other side, that I can be clearer, offer more clarity about why we're doing something, and be more honest about certain things. I think that is helpful, because I can say, I know exactly how you're feeling, I've been there, but this is what we're doing and this is why. And I try very much to involve the whole of my team in wider decision-making processes and in those strategic points. So that I say is a big shift in mindset. I think that's the sort of overriding faith that one has to have in understanding the business to the point where you know that you're making the right calls, but also listening to your team and knowing when they're tired, when actually they can't do another event, when the time is to close the books for that month. All of those things, I think that I stand myself in quite good stead because I have been on the other side. But it is a shift in mindset, because you are having to make those calls rather than rebel against them.
It's a transparency thing, isn't it? You want to be clear with them about why you need to do things, but also then if you're sort of going the other way and going to other stakeholders in the business, being transparent about the pressures they might be under. Yeah, it's always been the approach that I've had when I've been recruiting, is you need to have that sort of empathy and remember what it's like. Do you find it's tricky not to try and keep a control of the details? Or do you have to just force yourself to step back?
It certainly was for me in the first sort of year, 2 years, I would say. I think that's across all hospitality professionals. There is a mindset of, if I don't do it, it's not going to get done properly. And the only way you stop doing that is recognizing that you cannot physically do everything. So certainly when I was first a manager, I tried very hard to be on hand at all points. I think one of the best things for me recently was recognizing that I needed to do a team dynamic shift and create some senior managers, because I was standing at the time as the only senior manager, and I took that very seriously, in that I can't give somebody something to do that is above their pay grade, or that is slightly more stressful than actually they should be looking at, or that might be confidential in some way. And actually kind of saying, well, I can't actually do all of this myself, so I'm going to need to create, and I created 2 senior manager positions. One I promoted internally and one I hired externally for. And then it's very, very difficult. One of them in particular was very much doing a job that I used to do for a long period of time, and having to relinquish control and let her do it in the way that she wants to do it was initially very difficult to do. But actually you just have to force yourself to do it. You cannot be at every single event, watching every single caterer, watching every single production supplier, involved in every single client meeting. You just physically can't do it. And I think if you're clever and you promote people and hire people, the right people, and put them in the right positions and give them the right training and the right experience and the right confidence levels to achieve those tasks, and you trust them, you trust what they're going to do, you trust, it might not be how you've done it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. It's just not how you would have done it. That in itself is freedom. And now I can sort of give them a task, and I don't even tell them how I want it done. I just know that they're going to do it in the best way that works for them.
Absolutely. It's something I've seen with people that I've worked with, candidates I've spoken to, clients, from a small restaurant up to a massive event organization. But I think even the smaller restaurant, the high performer, I'm talking the sort of supervisor, head waiters, the ones that just make it go. They are so in tune with, this is the most efficient way to do this, and if we don't do it this way, then this will collapse 5 hours or 5 days down the line. They just have an intuitive sense of how it goes. And I think that's one of that sort of strands of DNA that goes through really good event professionals. But on the flip side, there comes a point where, as you say, you can't be everywhere. So you have to step back. I think it's a fascinating thing.
There are certain things that I do say to the team, no, don't do that, because I've already done the painful bit. I've tried to do that. It doesn't work. I spent X, Y, and Z number of months trying, pleading, begging, borrowing, stealing to try to get it to a place that it was successful. And it isn't. It just doesn't work in this venue, or it doesn't work with our clients currently. If you can think of a way that I haven't tried, these are all the things that I've tried. If you can think of a way that I haven't tried, then by all means suggest it to me. But yeah, I have said to team members, I've tried it. I appreciate the thought process. It doesn't work here in quite the way that you think it might. It does work at other venues. It doesn't work here. And this is why. But you have to explain why. You can't just say, no, don't do it, because they're going to question it and be like, well, why? They're not going to understand the context or the nuance. You have to be clear about what you've tried before and be open to the fact that they may have a experience, skill set, understanding of whatever it is that you're discussing that you maybe didn't have. And so therefore they might be successful, or that things might have changed within the organization. So it didn't work under a previous sort of strategy or under a previous plan or under a previous CEO, but it might work now because those dynamics have shifted. So I think it's quite easy for event professionals to go, no, that doesn't work, move it to the side. But you can revisit things.
Moving from things that maybe don't work to things that do work, I think, a large part of event sales is being able to confidently pitch the venue. I was speaking to one of our other guests who runs lots of venue tours, as you would expect, and went to a venue for her own wedding. She was looking for venues, and the way that the tour was ran completely changed her approach to how she was going to run her own tours moving forward. So I'm interested if you have a go-to sort of playbook or strategy. Obviously, I know you can't probably give away all your secrets, but what would your tip be for somebody that's starting out in a role, having to oversee event tours?
Firstly, don't put a time limit on a show round. People say, oh, it'll take half an hour. Not with a wedding client, it won't. it'll take 2. I think not limiting yourself on a time or not limiting yourself on how it's done is always key. I always start a show round by asking them to remind me about their event. I want to hear it in their own words, not what they've written on an email. I'll have read the email, so I'll have read the brief and read what they sent through previously. I want, at the very beginning, for them to just verbalise what it is that they're looking for. And then I will tailor the show round based on what they've said to me. There's no point in me showing all of the myriad things that you can do at the Queen's House, for example, and all of the different ways that you can have people arrive and all of the different things that you can do during dinner, if it's a standing reception and they're coming from a specific location and they're arriving by bus. It's like I have to remind myself and really understand what it is that the client is looking for, and then try and tailor the show round based on that. And also at that point, being able to be honest about, well, actually, that's probably not going to be possible here because of X or Y or Z. So I think listening to show rounds, salespeople love the sound of their own voice. I'm doing it now. I just love listening to myself speak. We love the sound of our own voice, so we can sort of dominate a show round by just waxing lyrical about all of the myriad things that we do, and it's actually completely and utterly irrelevant. With wedding clients, at the end of the show round, I talk about that basically I have just thrown a load of spaghetti at the wall. They are going to be so overwhelmed by the things that I've spoken to them about, and they're not going to remember any of it. So I would say, don't be kind of downcast if you get home and you go, oh, what did she say about that? And what was she talking about when she mentioned that room? I just say, I've thrown a load of spaghetti at the wall. Some of it will stick, some of it won't. But that's what I'm here for, to ask questions of. You'll come up with more questions afterwards. I'm here, I'm emailable, callable. Please feel free to do it. The other thing I really like is when venues connect the show round in some way to the experience that they're offering. With the Royal Observatory, I start on the outside looking at the clock and looking at the meridian line. This is why we're here. This is what the building is here for. With the Queen's House, I talk about, have you ever been in before? Have you visited in the daytime? Have you come to an event here? And then talking about what she is as a building, what she has been at various different points, and what she is today, and immediately connecting people to the history and the structure of the building in a way that you can't do with venues that aren't unique in that sense. Because if they understand that now the Queen's House is an art gallery that houses a national collection, when I tell them later that they aren't going to be able to have red wine during their standing reception, it will make a lot more sense than if I'm just like, yeah, the Queen's House is so fabulous, it can do all of these wonderful things. I'm already building up for the potential restrictions or the potential challenges about hosting an event in that venue, because I'm explaining what she is and what her purpose is. So I think that's really key on a show round, to really align the client's vision with your venue and how they can sort of play with each other rather than work against each other.
I think, especially with wedding clients, from my experience, you're being measured against probably one or two very specific pieces of criteria that have come from often a Pinterest board or something. It can be as granular as that. So being able to, at the start, just hit reset and say, yeah, okay, what is the one thing you want to leave knowing, or the one thing, the experience you want to give your guests? Absolutely critical. Going back to the more practical side of events, I have a belief that you can't make great events without great people. So when you're building a team for your events, at all levels, are there key attributes and characteristics that you're looking for, or does it depend on the role?
It will always depend on the role. And I guess it depends when you're building a team from scratch, or whether you're hiring into a team. So if you've only got one role available, you need somebody who can, do what the job description says, but you also want to make sure that they fit within the team. So I always, as part of our recruitment process, we have a second interview stage, and the second interview involves the team showing them around one of the venues. And it's an opportunity for the team to kind of get a vibe for them, and for them to get a vibe of the team. It's not recruitment is never a one-way street. They have to feel as comfortable joining that organization as the organization is bringing that person in. So it's an opportunity for the team to see whether there's a good dynamic there, whether there's any kind of chemistry, and also whether they're asking the right questions about the venue, whether their kind of understanding of what we do is in line. We did a bit of training last year. Me, my senior managers, my event managers, and a couple of other people from a fellow department, we did resilience training. And as part of that process, we did a Colour Me profile. It's a profile that assesses what your personality is like at its kind of base level, and then what your personality is like at work. And it gives you a colour. So there's like a colour wheel: red, yellow, green, blue, right? And each of the colours has a certain sort of feeling associated with it. So blue is very process driven. Green is very empathetic. I'm absolutely sort of massacring this, by the way. This is very, very basic. If you're interested in this, please go and Google it. Green is very empathetic. Yellow is very extroverted and people focused. And red is very sort of task focused, quite good on deadlines and things like that. And as part of that training, we were looking at who we all were normally, and then who we were at work, and where you're able to flex into different colours at certain points. So as a manager, you have to be able to flex into all of those different points. Usually it's easier to flex into the two colours that are closest to you. So I'm very yellow. I'm sort of feed off people, which is why I'm probably quite good at networking and talking to people. That's very much kind of where I sit. I'm easily able to access my sort of empathetic emotions, and I'm easily able to kind of go into tasks and deadlines and, asking for the sale and those sorts of things. But I do struggle going opposite into processes. Processes aren't really my bag. I have to put an awful lot of time and energy when I'm looking at doing something that's very process driven. And then what was really interesting was then looking at your team and who you've got from each of those circles and each of those colours, and a strong team has somebody represented from each of those. So sometimes when you're then looking at adding somebody into the team, you might look at your current team and go, we've got loads of people who are really good with people. We've got lots of people who care about sort of making sure that everyone's happy and having that kind of green energy. We've got, somebody who's always good at saying at the end of a meeting, right, so what are we actually going to do about this? We've talked a lot. What are we actually going to do? But we don't have anyone who looks at the process, who looks at how we're going to do something. So actually, with this new role, it'd be really helpful to look for somebody who may have more skills in that specific area, who may find that easier because it will enhance the overall team. So that, I think, was really interesting to me to understand as a manager. And obviously you don't know when you're interviewing somebody what their profile is going to be, but you can certainly get a vibe from different people and see where they're likely to fit, or where certain roles are going to be better for certain people. So if you're looking at hiring a business development manager, you're probably going to want somebody who's pretty yellow and a little bit of red. So, somebody who's very happy talking to people and is very confident in asking for the sale. What are we going to do now? What's the next steps? If you're hiring somebody who is managing somebody who's quite young, who's quite inexperienced, you're going to want somebody who's quite empathetic. So maybe someone who's quite green, who has all of those skill sets. And if you're hiring, somebody who's going to overhaul a process or a system and, build a new CRM system for you, then you're going to want somebody who's really good at processes. So being able, it's a simplified version, but it's pinpointing those strengths that are outside of just what's listed on the job description.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it in terms of the team. Actually, hiring, it's not always just about the role. It's actually about the team dynamic. I think that's really interesting. I think I've come across this before in a sales job many years ago when I was pursuing, like you, an acting career many moons ago. You still sort of sometimes think, right, this person's in red mode or blue mode or something. Also, I think I was just thinking, all of the business development professionals I've worked with, I'm now thinking they hate being tied down to systems.
Yeah,
because they want to be able
it's not how they work. Yeah, it's just not how their brain works. So obviously, as a manager, I can be having to do a one-to-one, so I'm having to be very green, and then I'm going to have to look at forecasting, so I'm going to have to go into my red zone. Then I'm going to a networking event in the evening, so I'm going to yellow. Then I'm having to write an SOP, so I'm having to go into my blue, and I can do all of that in one day. And it's exhausting when you're having to be things that don't come naturally to you. Whereas if I asked, a team member who was very, very blue to do a networking event, they would find that incredibly stressful and incredibly exhausting. And you probably wouldn't get the best out of them for the day leading up to it or the day after it, because their brain will be just focusing on, oh my God, this is my worst nightmare, this is my worst nightmare. And being able to recognize within your team who is better at certain things. So when you are delegating, I have team members who I know are going to be better at certain tasks than they are at others because of where they sit and what their innate personal strengths are, rather than just what their job role tells me that they are.
Do you find that with your role, you're having to sort of jump between on a daily basis, or is there a way that you could schedule, would you want to schedule batching, say, all the blue on a blue day and then all the red? I guess, it depends when events are coming up.
Yeah, you can batch it. But actually one of the things that they talked about in the resilience training was about sandwiching it. So if you batch it, if you say, right, Tuesdays, budget days, and I'm going to be miserable, then every day you get up on a Tuesday, you're just going to be blooming miserable. You're just going to wake up and go, oh, all day today I'm dealing with budgets. Horrible. Whereas if you go, right, first thing this morning I've got a show round, that's going to get me up and pepped. I'm going to be talking to people. I'm going to be super happy. Then I'll sneak in some budget around lunchtime, do 2 hours of budget that I need to. And then in the afternoon, I'll do another show round, or I'll go for a meeting with a supplier or whatever it is. So you sandwich it between two things that you know are going to replenish your energy. You want to keep your energy at a certain level, and you know that one thing's going to bring it down and one thing's going to bring it up. So you want to kind of ride the wave of it almost. Whereas if you batch it and make it a specific day, then it will just ruin Tuesdays for you.
We want that. We've talked about team dynamics. I think a really interesting thing that's happening now is Gen Z is coming into the workforce. Have you seen a difference in their approach, what they want from their jobs, and have you had to tweak your recruitment strategy accordingly, or is all that sort of hype in the press just hype?
I can't speak too much on experience because I currently don't have anyone from Gen Z in my team. It's a very millennial team, which is a frustration for me. I want to have somebody from Gen Z in. I want to have people across different generations because I think it just brings different thoughts and insights and ideas and ways of handling it. Obviously you can't create roles just willy-nilly, so it's not possible for me at the moment, but I think a lot of it is hype in the press. I don't think that Gen Z are anywhere near as challenging, I think, as they're sort of made out to be. I think actually the opposite. I do mentoring and coaching with people who are kind of currently going through university, and they're so switched on. They're so eager to get their hands dirty and dive in and start building up that experience. And they've had a really tough 10 years, and so there's kind of a little bit of trauma on them in terms of the things that they've already had to experience and see. So I think the addition of Gen Z is going to be a really exciting one to the industry. We are certainly starting to see it already. I don't know if you've seen on Instagram or TikToks the Gen Z or Gen Z speak show rounds or tours. They're great. Whether they've just got somebody standing in front of a painting and going slay, and they're doing these kind of tours, but it's really playful and it's fun, and actually social media is so much more important now. And millennials, we're okay at social media, but Gen Z are really good at social media. They really they have their finger on the pulse. They absolutely know, and being able to tag into that zeitgeist really quickly and join the conversation almost is invaluable from a marketing perspective. And then I think in terms of recruitment, the main issue that I'm aware of in terms of recruitment is that people are having to monitor the presence of AI in recruitment applications. So that's not necessarily to say that AI shouldn't be used in recruitment applications, but I know some organizations are saying, we will do an AI sweep, and if we pick up any AI, then your application will be refused. I know some organizations that are saying you just have to declare whether you've used AI. So it's fine if you have, but you just have to be honest that you've used AI at some point in your application. But I think that will be the biggest sort of shift from a recruitment standpoint. I think they're perfectly ready to start going to interviews. But the thing I love about Gen Z is their boundary setting. They are so impressive in the ability to set boundaries. So I think it will shock people because millennials are the opposite and have no boundaries, and will sort of prostrate ourselves in the aim of things. And it's completely and utterly unhealthy and shouldn't be done. I think we'll find things like people getting up and leaving mid-interview, just saying, actually, based off this interaction currently, I'm not interested in the job. Now, that's something that I don't think many millennials would do. It would be like a complete anathema. We might come out of the interview and go, God, what an awful organisation. I'm never going to work there. But I think the younger generation are more than happy to go, actually, no, I'm not wasting my time here. This doesn't sound right. Or asking more pertinent questions at the end of an interview, not only about what the role is, but about the organisation and what the organisation's ethoses are, and what the stance of the organisation is on sustainability or on the gender pay gap. I think they're a really informed generation, and so we're going to have to be ready to answer those questions. And it's not something that many people may be competent or confident answering. They may go, oh, well, I'm just an event manager. It's not really my job to know or to influence or to have any control over that. But I think the younger generation are going to be expecting us to have an understanding of what our organisation believes in certain matters and on certain topics. And I think that will start to change the recruitment process a little bit.
I think it already has to an extent from the experience I've had as well. Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. I've got so many points. I've got AI, I've got boundaries, I've got so many things to dig into, which I had sort of my notes as well to talk about. Speaking of, boundaries, we're coming into busy season. long hours, like you mentioned, on your feet all day. How can event managers protect the well-being of their teams and also themselves as well as we go into a traditionally very busy time of the year?
Please, for the love of God, enforce toil. The main thing I just ask managers to do is to make sure that their team is taking time off. And if you need to close the diary, close the diary. There's this weird thing, because ultimately hospitality is commercial, that, we'll just take bookings and bookings and bookings, and somebody will leave in November and we will still take more bookings. It's nuts. It's absolutely nuts. We have a duty to our staff members to make sure that they get rest. And also, if they don't get rest, then mistakes will happen and ultimately the organisation will pay. I think that's the thing. And it takes somebody making a mistake because they were tired, because they were stressed, and an organisation having to give money back to the client before any change is made. And that just is nuts to me. I just don't want the mistakes to be made. I always talk about the actual Christmas period. I don't book for a number of reasons, mainly because staff is a big challenge, front of house staff. I don't book events between the 20th of December and the 4th of January. It's really, really difficult to get staff to work overtime during those periods. And I rota my team over that period. So the events inbox is always covered, the phone will always be manned, but they don't need to be sat at their desks at 9 in the morning until 5 p.m. on the 28th of December. It's just absolutely pointless. That's when they can use up their toil. They can really, enjoy that festive period. I also try to, when I'm rotoring staff, to make sure that they get like 1 or 2 weekends off a month, because I work a 9 to 5. Sometimes I'll spend a whole Saturday sitting down, resting, and, saying to my friends, I just can't be bothered to go out. I'm just going to sit. And if you work in ops, you're exhausted. We need those 3-day weekends to, 1 day to recover, 1 day to clean your house and do the shopping, and another day to see people. So I try to give weekends off where I can and share it out. It may mean that one person has to do 2 events over one weekend, but then they get, another weekend entirely off. So it gives them that freedom and flexibility. And I get staff buy-in on that. So making sure that if, somebody's got a sport match that they want to go to, or they're going away with their other half, or whatever it might be, that the rest of the team are sort of bought into their being able to do that, because they also are able to do the things that they want to do at different points. But the main thing is just make sure that people take their time off in lieu. It's so key. Even if it's not full days and they just don't start until 11, every day, just get them in to start at 11 rather than 9. It just means that they're more likely to get 7 hours sleep. And we all know that the difference that 7 hours sleep can make versus 4 hours, because we know that when people go home from an event, they're not going straight to bed. It takes a while to wind down. You have to have a glass of wine, you have to watch TV for a bit or listen to a podcast. You have to sort of, bring your nervous system down. So it's not like you're finishing an event, going home, going straight to bed. You've usually got an hour, maybe 2, of decompressing. So you need to give them enough time to make sure they're having a good, decent night's sleep.
The weekend thing and the toil thing as well, these are, on paper, like, it seems so simple, and yet it can very quickly get very complicated when you've got events coming in demand. One of the promises of AI, to touch on the other point that you mentioned, the promise that I see is that it's going to make things so much more efficient and easy and free up that capacity to let us do the things that we are great at, that, connection with people, empathy. I've tried a number of tools now with things like rota management, for example, which you would think would be, maybe I'm putting the wrong prompts in, but the tests that we ran, you say so-and-so needs to have this day off, and it puts them on 7 days in a row. And you think, oh, okay. Are you testing these things? Have you found any sort of useful use cases? Again, I'm going back to, is it just a bit of hype at the moment?
I think it is hype. I think, there are certainly going to be jobs that are lost as a result of AI. I don't think hospitality is really going to be one of them. People love going to the pub because there's a person behind. They don't want to be served by a robot, those sorts of things. It is the human interaction that people like, particularly when we're working more and more in exactly what we're doing here. I'm talking to you on a screen. That's the point of events. People like to go and actually have that kind of physical human touch, human connection. So I'm not worried about AI from that sense. I certainly think it is in its infancy. So there are things that it can do really, really well. And there are things like with rota management where I don't think it has quite the setup for it yet. But it will only learn that by us trying it and giving it the information. I, at the moment, use it more for team management and initial content ideas. So you can be very, very specific. There's a phrase, and I can't remember what it all stands for, but I think there's a phrase called risen about AI, which is basically about making sure that the prompt is really, really specific. So it's not write me a blog about marketing. It's I want a blog about marketing that is 100 to 150 words long that covers these 3 topics. And I want it written in this voice. And it's focusing on coming from this perspective and so on and so forth. So being really, really specific about exactly what you want to get out of it. Otherwise, everyone just writes a blog. Please give me a blog about wedding trends for 2024. Everyone will have the same blogs on all of their websites. And then also making sure that you have the human touch afterwards. So then looking through it and going, well, that doesn't make any sense at all. Let me rewrite it. But it's really good to be able to say, write me a blog schedule for the next 12 months for an event's purpose or whatever. And it gives you just the content headings, and then you can go, right, okay, who wants to write about X and who wants to write about Y, and then you go out. But it just saves that half an hour of somebody going, what we're going to talk about for the next 12 months. It just cuts out that slight middleman. Putting things into paragraphs that you just want to get out of your head quickly, bullet points, ideas that it can then formulate into actually cohesive sentences. That's super helpful. I think rotas will get there. The other thing that I'm starting to see more venues use is like a little bot on their website. We don't use this yet. We don't have that capability. And I don't actually think it would be particularly beneficial for venues like ours because they are so bespoke and nuanced and very, very specific. But having a little bot there to, say when somebody looks on, hello, how can I help? And, if somebody's got a really easy question like, what's the capacity of X room? And the bot can just feed it back. That's super helpful. If somebody just wants to know the price, there's a shift, going back to the Gen Z, Gen Z thing, there's a shift about marketing, and it's a bit of a battle with people at the moment. Historically, venues like ours have not put pricing on websites and things. It's a very much sort of ask on request sort of thing. And I understand that Gen Z very much will turn off if there's not clear pricing, particularly for things like weddings. If there's not clear pricing at the outset, then they won't even inquire. So there's a bit of a kind of battle for venues like ours at the moment as to, well, do we do this? Is this a shift? So having a bot there who can give that information without it being sort of broadcast to everyone, that's quite helpful. So I think it's slowly, surely. Things like check-in registrations at events, that will all become very AI focused. I think that's great because it frees up people to do the actual networking, say hello in person without spending their time looking down the list and ticking off people on a pen and paper.
And being rushed. This is my thing. I've been saying for ages, it's not necessarily going to mean that you reduce. You maybe have a slight reduction, but it's more about, again, the experience. It's not a great experience if you're at a conference or something and the only rep there is just completely frantic trying to find a name badge and all that kind of stuff. If they can actually be, right, here you go. Have you tried this? This session's really good. I've just been in there. All that kind of stuff. You mentioned, potentially using it to spit out the trends, wedding trends 2024. Are you seeing any trends in events, weddings that you think are going to become more emergent in 2025?
I mean, there are trends, but it's so difficult now. It is so difficult to pinpoint trends, to forecast, to have any idea of the future. It is virtually impossible. I think We've had a really difficult couple of years. COVID, Brexit, cost of living, economic crash, all of those sorts of things, election, America's election. It is a bit relentless, and it makes it virtually impossible to really plan like we used to be able to do. We used to be able to really almost give 5-year expectations about where we saw certain event types going or client types coming. It's just not possible anymore. I think the trend is bespoke, it is individual, and I think that's been coming for a while, but it means that you don't have as obvious a, right, everyone's going to have food stations or whatever. It's so varied. Every client, I think, has a different thought process, a different brief. There might be colours. I think sage green was big this year as a colour, you know, but ultimately the trend is people have less money, so they want to do bigger and better with less money. So they're putting more focus onto exactly what they're doing. So there's more of a minutiae detail. Whereas before, you would do party, summer party, company's Christmas party, they do a couple of client parties in the middle. Now they're going, right, how can we merge the summer and Christmas party and make it a client party? So we'll merge all of that budget that we had across all three. We'll do it in one, and we'll do it really, really well and focus. And this is what we want out of the end goal, rather than sort of more sporadic and hit and miss. People are really focused on the ROI, that return on investment piece, to really make sure that they're answering their clients and their stakeholders' questions around what you're doing with our money at this time. Why am I continuing to pay you this sort of money? And I think people are very mindful of that, particularly in light of, a potentially difficult budget coming out in October. Nobody quite knows what to expect, but we know it's not going to be, all singing or dancing, and what impact that's going to have. And it's what companies want to be seen to be doing rather than what they used to just do quite willy-nilly. They don't necessarily want to be seen visibly to be doing the same things, not only for external people, but for their own employees, who are saying, well, you haven't given me a cost of living pay rise, but yet you've just spent 50K on X, Y, or Z. People are very aware of the eyes on them. So that's more of a trend, just making sure that they're really being very specific about exactly what they're doing. But I don't think there's trends in quite the same way as there used to be of food stations or colours or, styles of events.
I could talk about this all day, but we are rapidly running out of time, and where you have a very busy schedule. So firstly, where can people find out more about Royal Museums Greenwich if they want to find out more? And then if we do have time, I always like to ask people what is their one amazing experience. So this can be something that you worked on, it can be an experience that you had as a guest or an attendee, or it could be a bucket list thing that you would like to do in the future.
Absolutely. So you can find out more about Royal Museums Greenwich at www.rmg.co.uk/venue hire. And that has our 5 venues. So we look after the National Maritime Museum, the Royal Observatory, Cutty Sark, Queen's House, and the Peter Harrison Planetarium. You can also find us on Instagram at RMG Venues, and you can find me on LinkedIn, Sophie Linin, Linin on LinkedIn. One amazing experience has to be, so I'm a bit of a history buff. I'm a big history geek, and I love my medieval and my Tudor history. And a few years ago, my mum bought me and my partner the opportunity to stay at Hever Castle, and it was so good. I just loved it. And the reason that is such a wow experience for me is because, from an events and hospitality professional sort of angle, it's about how can we better commercialize these historic venues, but also commercialize them to the right people, commercialize them to the people who are going to really appreciate them. How can we make these experiences really memorable? It's not just staying in a hotel. Okay, can we rent out rooms in there? And what, as part of that, can we offer? My favorite thing actually about that was the ability, the room was obviously lovely and it was amazing being there, but it was the ability to walk around the Hever Castle grounds after the public had left. And they've got, acres and acres and acres of grounds. And I've been to Hever Castle 10, 20 times in my life on various different occasions during the opening hours, during the daytime, and being able to wander around there as the sun was setting and as the sun had set, with the moon and the stars, and see the castle lit up with, and it just be us. There was like maybe 10 people staying there. So, it feels like it's just yours entirely. I thought it was such a really clever, interesting way of doing it. And I know a lot of different kind of castles and places are offering experiences like that now, funky Airbnbs, things like that. And they really connect to people because for whatever reason you can connect to something. I obviously connect to that experience because I'm very interested in Anne Boleyn and in the Tudors, but it would connect to somebody else for a very different reason, perhaps. And ultimately, events are about connections, and hospitality experience are about connections to people, to things, to places, to ideas, to themes. And that's why I like working within unique venues. That's very much my sort of bag. There is this connection that we as humans make. And in a world that is increasingly dominated by technology and by AI, events and hospitality experiences offer this wonderful chance to really experience something and to connect with whatever it might be. So that's my memory.
Something tangible, something real. I love that. I need to go and book a stay. It sounds incredible.
I've done them a nice little bit of PR there.
Absolutely. At least you get a kickback. I think that'd be good. Thank you very much for sharing your one amazing experience. And then, in the spirit of human connection with things, next time we do this, we should definitely do it in person.
Absolutely, with a glass of wine.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Joel.